Welcome to the deep dive. We take the sources you send us, we analyze the data, and we pull out the most important nuggets of history and insight. Our mission, as always, is to get you well informed quickly.
And today we're diving into, well, one of the most sensitive and frankly heart-wrenching stories in all of Islamic history.
We're looking at the family and the immediate lineage of the Prophet Muhammad.
It's sensitive because really the history of this family is the history of the earliest political and theological fractures in Islam.
Yeah.
We're relying on early biographies, the reported sayings, the hadith, and this is critical, the later sectarian accounts. So that means we have to navigate sources that are often written through a very specific political lens.
Absolutely. So our deep dive today, it's not about taking a side, it's about impartially laying out those key viewpoints, the mainstream Sunni perspective, the 12er Shia, and what secular historians are observing.
Right, to understand why the narratives clash.
Exactly. You have to understand the source material to really grasp the disagreements that are still around today. Okay, let's unpack this central emotional puzzle right at the start, because it really frames everything that follows. The Prophet Muhammad was, chosen by God, the final messenger, given divine protection. Yet he faced this profound, repeated personal loss within his own immediate family. How do we even begin to make sense of that?
Well, it's the ultimate human challenge, isn't it? Placed on a perfect religious figure. Why does the man closest to God experience what just looks like the most painful of human trials?
Let's start with the sons. The Prophet had 3 sons, Qasim, Abdullah, and then later Ibrahim. Every single one of them died.
In infancy or early childhood, yeah.
To a 7th century Arabian society where, lineage and male heirs were everything.
Yeah.
That would have been seen as a profound weakness.
Absolutely. And yet you have these hadiths that claim the Prophet had the physical strength of 30 men.
It seems like a total paradox. Why these short, tragic lives?
That paradox is something critics often bring up, so it's really important we address both parts of it. First, that hadith about the strength of 30 men. It's almost always interpreted by scholars as stamina for, say, worship or intense fasting or endurance in battle. It's a spiritual marker of his commitment. It's got nothing to do with biological destiny or his control over the divine decree, what Muslims call qadar.
So zero connection between his superhuman spiritual strength and his biological success.
None. They're operating in completely separate spheres.
Right.
Now, when we look at the deaths of his sons, the sources give us this really vital dual explanation.
Okay.
The first is just purely historical context. You have to remember, 7th century Arabia had extremely high infant mortality.
Right.
We're talking 30, maybe even 50% of children just didn't make it past the age of 5. So statistically, the deaths of 3 sons, while it's profoundly tragic, it was sadly common. Not mysterious or unique.
Wait, okay, if it was statistically normal, why did theologians feel the need to bring in this, heavy, powerful divine explanation? Couldn't they just say, well, mortality rates were high?
That's a brilliant question, and it gets to the need to confirm that everything happens with God's intention. This is where the theological necessity, the hikmah, comes in. There's a really strong consensus across all major Muslim sects that these deaths were an act of divine wisdom.
Divine wisdom.
How?
Well, think about it. Had a son lived to adulthood, he would have been the natural heir.
To everything, political and religious authority.
Exactly. It would have instantly established prophethood as a hereditary monarchy, a tribal dynasty. But since Muhammad is famously the seal of the prophets, the final one.
As it says in the Quran.
Right. His lineage couldn't continue the prophetic office. The deaths ensured the leadership of the community. The ummah would be decided by other means, not just birthright. It was a divine prevention of Islam becoming a sort of kingly cult.
That makes profound sense. It's a way to transition from one man's prophethood to a community's governance. But let's look at Ibrahim, the youngest son born to Maria.
Maria the Copte. Right. She was a captive, often called a slave or concubine. So was his death maybe a bit convenient? A way to avoid messy inheritance issues, especially given his mother's status.
That interpretation, the convenient death theory, is rejected across the board by scholars. First, his mother was what's known as an walid,
Which means?
literally mother of a child. But the key here, under classical Islamic law, is that once a slave bears her master's child, that child is fully legitimate. And the mother gets a unique status and her freedom when the master dies. Ibrahim was a legitimate son. His status was no hurdle to succession.
And the Prophet's own reaction to his death, what do the sources say?
It was one of overwhelming human grief. The Hadith sources are very, very clear on this. When Ibrahim died, the Prophet wept publicly. He said, "The eyes sheds tears and the heart grieves, but we say only what pleases our Lord."
It's an act of submission then, not indifference or manipulation.
Precisely. It's an incredibly moving, very human moment.
And if you remember the sources, there's that famous story about the solar eclipse, right? It happened right around the time of Ibrahim's death.
Yes. And the community, they naturally thought the eclipse was a cosmic sign. Heaven was mourning with their prophet.
Of course.
But Muhammad used that exact moment to teach against superstition. He confirmed that celestial events are signs of God's power, not tied to the life or death of any human, even his own son. He turned his personal tragedy into a teaching moment.
This is where it gets really interesting for me, though. This is a question we saw a lot in the sources. We know that during the Miraj, the heavenly ascent, the Prophet successfully negotiated with Allah to reduce the daily prayers from 50 down to just 5 for the entire community.
A huge deal.
So if he had that kind of power to intercede on such a massive spiritual matter for everyone,
Right.
why couldn't he intercede to save his own sons?
That question really clarifies the absolute distinction between two types of divine interaction. The prayer reduction was an intercession, a shafa'ah, about religious law. It was a universal mercy for his followers.
But his children's deaths.
That was a personal trial, a matter of his own divine decree, his qada.
So he draws a hard line between interceding on a law for the community and accepting a personal decree for himself.
Exactly. Prophets are shown to accept immense personal loss. Think of Job or Jacob to model that perfect submission and patience, sabr, that's required of all believers. He showed that even the highest prophet has to accept the natural human order of life and death without asking for special treatment. His grief was real, but his faith in the decree was absolute.
So with the male line extinguished by divine decree, the continuation of the prophet's biological lineage rests entirely on his daughters, and really specifically on Fatima.
Right, she's the only child who survived him, though only for a short time. She becomes the essential gateway for the prophet's bloodline, the Sayyids, who are revered across the globe today.
And this is exactly where the story shifts. It goes from theological explanation to political catastrophe.
It creates the largest, deepest fracture point between Sunni and Shia Muslims, a fracture that's still there. The whole dispute centers on what happened right after the prophet's death.
And the central question is just so emotionally charged. Was Fatima oppressed, denied her rights, and maybe even injured by the new political leadership?
The narratives clash violently here. The Shia narrative, it strongly affirms the famous door incident.
Okay, tell us about that.
They believe that when Ali initially refused to pledge allegiance to the first caliph, Umar's forces threatened or even physically attacked her house. This narrative often includes her being denied the Fadak land inheritance, being physically injured, and in some versions, a subsequent miscarriage.
So for the Shia, this is the ultimate betrayal.
It's the root failure of the early caliphate, a betrayal of the prophet's own family.
And the Sunni narrative offers a completely different picture, I assume.
It does, completely. The Sunni view denies any kind of physical assault on Fatima. They see the whole Fadak land thing as a legal disagreement based on a hadith cited by Abu Bakr that prophets leave no inheritance.
So just a misunderstanding then.
A political misunderstanding and a legal dispute. They say that while Fatima was, deeply distressed, her death just a few months later was because of overwhelming grief for her father, not violence.
That is a massive difference in interpretation.
It shifts the entire blame away from the companions and onto natural causes.
That level of political and emotional strain in Medina right after the prophet's death, it must have been suffocating. Which makes the whole controversy over her secret burial almost inevitable, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. The secrecy around where she was buried is one of the most powerful and enduring symbolic acts of that whole period.
And for the Shia, it's a protest.
A lasting, silent protest against the new ruling establishment. She asked to be buried at night with only Ali there, so that the companions she felt had wronged her couldn't even attend her funeral. It's an act of profound political defiance.
Wow. And how do Sunnis interpret the secrecy?
Sunni scholars generally frame it as a request for privacy or modesty, something in keeping with the simplicity and humility of early Islam. But either way you look at it, the fact that her burial site is still unknown is a perpetual symbol of that unresolved conflict.
We also need to touch on her unique status. Why is Fatima, compared to her 3 sisters, theologically elevated by Shia Muslims to a status of near infallibility?
This is just fundamental to Shia theology because of the concept of the imamat, the idea of continued spiritual leadership after the prophet. Fatima is considered part of the al-Qisa, the people of the cloak.
And that's linked to the Quran.
Yes, specifically to the verse of purification. Her purity, this idea of being masuma or near infallible, was essential because she was the mother of the imams, the spiritual successors who would carry on that divine guidance. Her status is directly tied to the divine leadership structure the Shia recognize.
While Fatima's line becomes this defining political issue, we shouldn't forget her three elder sisters, Zainab, Ruqayya, and Kulthum. We find a lot less about their daily lives compared to Fatima or even the Prophet's wife, Aisha.
And that's a common challenge, isn't it, when studying women in early history who weren't at the center of legal or major political fights. But the documents we do have, they lead us to another historical debate. Were all four of them actually biological daughters of the Prophet and Khadijah?
Okay, I know the Sunni majority view is firmly, yes, four biological daughters.
Yeah.
So where does the skepticism come from?
It comes from minor inconsistencies you can find in some of the earliest biographical accounts, the Sirah. A minority of scholars, often Shia or secular historians, they'll point to these and suggest that maybe Zainab, Ruqayya, and Kulthum were stepdaughters of Khadijah from another marriage, or maybe just close relatives raised in the house.
So the term daughter might have been used more broadly to mean kin in that context.
Exactly. The meaning of family terms could be a bit more fluid. But we have to stress, the Sunni view is very firm on them being four biological daughters. And the core facts of their marriages, which are really important politically, are generally accepted by everyone.
Let's talk about those political marriages, specifically Ruqayya and Kulthum. They both sequentially married Uthman.
Who would later become the third caliph.
Right. Was this just about consolidating power?
Yeah.
Linking the prophet to the incredibly powerful Umayyad tribe?
In that era, the idea of an elite marriage that wasn't tied to strengthening alliances, it just didn't really exist. These marriages were standard practice. After Ruqayya died, the prophet gave Uthman his other daughter, Kulthum, and this honor earned Uthman that unique title, Dul Nurayn.
Possessor of two lights.
Right, for marrying two daughters of the prophet. It was a deeply revered status.
And while it was a political win, the sources frame it as more of an honor.
They do, primarily as a mark of profound honor for Uthman. And you see something similar with Zainab's marriage to Awaz. The prophet honored their pre-Islamic marriage, even though her husband wasn't a Muslim at first. It shows this measured, gradual application of religious law, respecting existing family bonds.
When we look at the whole family saga, the most remembered figures today are arguably the grandsons, Hassan and Hussein. Why are the grandsons more central to global Islamic history and memory than the Prophet's own children?
The answer is all about the nature of their deaths. It's public political martyrdom versus private natural death.
Right, the daughters died of illness or grief.
But Hussein's death at Karbala in 680 CE was a defining public political event. It was seen by all sects as a massive tragedy, this iconic symbolic stand against the tyranny of the ruling Umayyad dynasty.
So his sacrifice was immediately politicized. It became history in the making.
Precisely. That political symbolism elevates Hussein into this universal figure of ultimate sacrifice for justice. That one tragedy fundamentally reshaped the collective memory of early Islam and just profoundly raised his status, especially for the Shia. Their identity is really forged in the memory of that sacrifice.
Okay, let's address the challenge from critics and secular observers. If you put all this loss together, the sons dying, the political fights, the martyrdoms, do these family tragedies prove Muhammad was just a man whose personal flaws or desires ended up shaping a religion?
The consistent scholarly response, from all traditions really, is that far from disproving prophethood, tragedy actually confirms the prophet's complete human nature. He was fully human.
So his perfection wasn't in escaping suffering.
No. The sources argue it lies in the message and in his response to loss. Profound human grief, balanced with that unwavering faith and submission that Sabri we talked about. And the fact that these core, difficult facts are consistent across multiple, sometimes biased sources, well, that actually lends a lot of credibility to the overall story.
We started by saying these questions are often considered taboo. Why is that? Why, today, do these inquiries into the Prophet's family still provoke such strong, emotional, sometimes hostile reactions?
Because they're not neutral historical questions. They are deeply personal. They touch on the honor of revered family members, and, most dangerously, they reopen sectarian wounds that were codified centuries ago.
Especially around the succession.
Exactly, and the character of the early companions. When these topics come up in public, the communal memory of those ancient political fights just rushes to the surface, and it can feel like a modern attack instead of a historical question.
So modern historians have to approach this with incredible sensitivity, with adab, as it's called in the tradition.
Exactly. The goal has to be understanding, not accusation.
This deep dive really reveals that the real controversy around the Prophet's family isn't about biology or divine curses. It's about the explosive tension that's just inherent in that transition from spiritual prophethood to political rule.
A tension that defined early Islam and, continues to shape sectarian identity today.
And that leads us to the final thought we want to leave you with.
If the Quran states clearly that there is no superiority of one person over another except in piety, but a strong cultural and theological tradition developed that honors the Prophet's descendants, the Sayyids, with special spiritual and social privilege, how should a modern Muslim reconcile that theological ideal of egalitarianism with the historical reality of sacred bloodline privilege? Thank you for diving deep with us.